My husband humiliated me because I haven't bear him a child after our 40th year in marriage, but he never knew he was the problem. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, please do well to hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. The first few years of Kelechi and Adaora's marriage were full of promise. Their wedding had been the talk of the town, a glamorous ceremony with gold trimmings, a white horse-drawn carriage, and guests that filled every seat in the grand cathedral. Kelechi, a well-known businessman, had found his match in Adaora, a kind-hearted, educated woman with a gentle spirit. Everyone called them the perfect couple. But by the 4th year, the whispers began. Adaora still hasn't conceived. What's she waiting for? Is she even trying? Kelechi smiled at the world but fumed in private. His mother's voice echoed in his ears every day. You need a child, my son. What is a man without an heir? He started changing. At first, it was small things, skipping dinner, staying out late, not responding to Adaora's good-night kisses. Then came the silence. Then the snide remarks. If I had married Ngozi like I was told, I would have been a father by now, he muttered one morning. Adaora froze, a knife in hand, preparing his favorite yam porridge. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly. She didn't want him to see. She had seen doctors. They told her she was fine. Kelechi refused to get tested. A man's seed is never the problem, he scoffed. He started talking down to her in front of others, especially his family. What does she know? She can't even do the one thing a wife is supposed to do, he said once at his cousin's naming ceremony. Everyone laughed. Adaora smiled faintly, holding back the flood of shame. She cried into her pillow that night. She had given up her job for this marriage. She had poured her heart into their home, prayed at every vigil, fasted on every recommendation. But her womb remained empty. And now, her marriage was growing emptier too. Still, Adaora stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she had hope. Hope that love could be repaired. Hope that truth would eventually come out. And deep in her heart, a whisper stronger than the gossip around her told her, this was not how her story would end. It was a Saturday morning when Adaora noticed the change. Kelechi was humming. He hadn't hummed in years. She was setting the breakfast table when his phone lit up. A name flashed across the screen. Nkiru, new beginning red hearts. Her hand trembled. She wasn't the jealous type, but something about that heart, that word, beginning, sent chills through her bones. Kelechi started dressing better, coming home even later, wearing expensive cologne Adaora didn't recognize. One night, he returned at midnight, lips stained red. Lipstick red. When she asked where he'd been, he simply looked at her and said, "At least some women still make a man feel like a man." Adaora's heart cracked. She didn't shout. She didn't throw things. She simply walked to the bedroom and knelt by her bed. "God, are you still there?" she whispered. A week later, Kelechi brought Nkiru home under the pretense of a business dinner. She wore a tight red dress and carried herself like a queen. Kelechi introduced her with too much pride. "This is Nkiru, my new business consultant. She's brilliant and full of life," he said, eyeing Adaora. Dinner was a disaster. Nkiru laughed at all Kelechi's jokes. Adaora sat there, the invisible wife in her own home. Later that night, after Nkiru left, Kelechi threw down his napkin and said, "Maybe I need to marry someone who can give me what you can't." The words cut deeper than any blade. Adaora didn't cry that night. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out her old degree certificate. It had been collecting dust for years. Her fingers traced her name, Adaora Nkemdalam Okoye, B.Sc. in medical laboratory science. Maybe it was time to remember who she was before she became the barren wife. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but tonight, she decided, if Kelechi couldn't see her worth, she would rediscover it herself. She folded her certificate, placed it gently in her bag, and began packing. Adaora moved out quietly. No drama. No yelling. Just silence. She left a short note on the dresser. I prayed for us. You chose another path. I choose myself now. Her mother welcomed her with open arms, though sadness lingered in her eyes. You're not a failure, Adaora. You were a faithful wife. That's enough, she said, wrapping her in a warm embrace. In that small guest room at her mother's, Adaora started piecing her life back together. She returned to the hospital where she had once interned. The matron, remembering her intelligence and dedication, offered her a temporary position in the lab. Adaora dove into the work, quietly, diligently, always with a soft smile. She felt alive again. One afternoon, a colleague named Dr. Jide approached her. He was kind, with thoughtful eyes and a calm voice. You're brilliant, he said after she correctly diagnosed a rare blood disorder. She smiled for real that day. They began talking during lunch breaks. He never pried about her past but listened attentively when she shared. One day, she confided, I was told I was barren. But the tests say otherwise. My husband never even checked himself. Jide leaned in gently and said, Infertility isn't a woman's burden alone. I wish more men understood that. Something softened in her heart. Meanwhile, Kelechi's life began to unravel. Nkiru, fiery and unpredictable, demanded everything: money, attention, power. She didn't want to be a second wife. She wanted a throne. Kelechi gave in, marrying her in a court registry. But still, no child came. And when the doctors suggested Kelechi take a fertility test, Nkiru exploded. So I'm the problem now? You men are unbelievable. Kelechi was stunned. The very words he had once thrown at Adaora now came back at him like a boomerang. Back in her mother's home, Adaora looked at herself in the mirror, not as a broken wife, but as a whole woman. She had no husband, no child, but she had peace. And soon, she would have answers that would shake everything Kelechi thought he knew. It started with a health outreach program. Adaora and Dr. Jide volunteered to run free medical tests for men and women in a rural village nearby. It was meant to be a simple mission: checkups, blood pressure readings, basic fertility assessments. But something unexpected happened. One of the nurses whispered, Dr. Jide, I think this man's results are unusual. Would you take a look? Jide glanced at the form. Then he froze. It was Kelechi. He had come secretly, without Nkiru's knowledge. Perhaps desperation had driven him there. After 3 years with Nkiru and no child, he had finally agreed to run a sperm test. Jide didn't flinch. With quiet professionalism, he took the sample, processed it, and analyzed it. The results: azoospermia. Complete absence of sperm cells. It wasn't Adaora. It had never been her. The guilt washed over Jide even though he wasn't to blame. Adaora needs to know, he said quietly that evening. But Adaora didn't react with anger when he told her. She just sat, quiet and still. Then she whispered, I knew. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not for the betrayal, not even for the years she lost, but for the child she never got to love. For the home that could have been full of laughter if only truth had been allowed in. Meanwhile, Kelechi sat in his car, hands shaking, staring at the report. For the first time in his life, he felt small. All those years of blaming Adaora, all the shame he piled on her, and it was him all along. He called Nkiru, hoping for comfort. But she laughed bitterly and hung up. No air. No patience. Kelechi was left with silence. And Adaora. She walked into the hospital the next day with renewed strength. For the first time, she wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's failure. She was free. And something beautiful was about to enter her life. 3 months after the outreach, Adaora was fully immersed in her work at the hospital. She had been promoted to senior lab scientist, and her confidence now lit up the halls she used to walk quietly through. She no longer wore her pain like a coat. She wore grace, dignity, and purpose. One evening, as she was locking up the lab, she heard soft footsteps. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, stood by the doorway, dirty feet, torn shirt, and wide, frightened eyes. "I'm hungry," he said, almost in a whisper. Her heart melted. She knelt beside him. "Where's your mummy or daddy?" He looked down. "They left. I sleep behind that shop. But I heard this place gives people help." Adaora took him in that night. Cleaned him, fed him, and named him Chisom. God is with me. Social services were alerted, but until they found permanent placement, the boy was allowed to stay with her temporarily. What began as a temporary arrangement became something deeper. Chisom followed her everywhere. "Auntie, you're kind," he'd say, snuggling into her arms. She taught him to read, brush his teeth, and say grace before meals. One day, while playing, he ran to her, arms wide open. "Mummy!" She froze. He said it so naturally, so joyfully. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't expected it. But it felt right. That night, Adaora cried, not tears of sadness, but of a healing long overdue. She realized then that motherhood didn't always come through the womb. Sometimes it came through the heart. Dr. Jide, watching from a distance, saw something rare in Adaora, strength refined by pain, love birthed from ashes. One evening, he knocked gently on her door, holding a small box. Inside was a tiny silver bracelet, engraved with, "To the woman who carries light." "I don't know what the future holds, Adaora," he said, eyes steady, "but I'd be honored to walk beside you in it." And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream again. This time, the dream wasn't broken. It was just beginning. Weeks turned into months, and Adaora's life blossomed like a flower finally touched by the sun. Chisom was enrolled in school. He came home every day with stories, crayon drawings, and sometimes wild, adorable questions. Adaora never thought she could laugh this freely again. And yet, here she was, laughing, healing, loving. Her bond with Dr. Jide also deepened. He never rushed her. He didn't try to fix her. He just stood by her side, steady, patient, kind. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived. No name on the front. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." She opened it carefully, and the handwriting struck her like lightning. It was Kelechi. "Adaora, I don't know how to say this in a way that truly shows the depth of my regret. You were never the problem. I was. The tests confirmed what I should have accepted long ago. I blamed you. I mocked you. I humiliated you in ways that now keep me up at night. Nkiru has left. I have nothing now. And maybe that's what I deserve. But you deserved the world. I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you." Adaora held the letter in silence for a long time. She didn't feel anger. She felt peace. She walked outside, where Chisom was drawing with chalk on the pavement. "Mummy, look. I drew our house. And that's me, that's you, and that's Uncle Jide." The drawing was messy, innocent, and perfect. Adaora smiled. Later that night, she folded the letter and placed it in a box labeled "Lessons, Not Luggage." She wouldn't carry the pain into her future, but she wouldn't forget what it taught her. She texted Jide, I'm ready to talk about us." And just like that, another chapter in her life was waiting to be written. But this time, the pen was in her hand. Adaora stood before the mirror in a flowing teal gown, soft curls cascading over her shoulders. There was no veil, no orchestra, no gold-studded invitations, just a quiet garden, family, and friends who had witnessed her rise from ashes. Today wasn't about proving anything. It was about celebrating everything she had become. She was marrying Jide. Not because she needed to be saved. Not because she was running from loneliness. But because love, pure, patient love, had found her and asked to walk beside her, not ahead. Her mother walked her down the aisle. Chisom held a bouquet in his tiny hands, grinning with a missing tooth and shouting, "That's my mummy!" The guests laughed. Adaora's eyes filled with tears. Jide stood at the altar, dressed simply, but radiating peace. When he saw her, his breath caught. She was no longer just the woman he'd admired from afar. She was the woman who had chosen to live again. The vows were simple. "I don't promise a perfect life," Jide said. "But I promise a peaceful one. One where your voice matters, your dreams thrive, and your heart is never alone." "I once thought I had lost everything," Adaora replied. "But now I know I was being prepared for something better. You, Chisom, this moment, it was all worth the wait." After the ceremony, Chisom ran up to them. "So I can call him Daddy now, right?" Adaora looked at Jide. He knelt, opened his arms, and said, "Only if you want to, son." Chisom threw himself into his arms. It wasn't the life Adaora had once dreamed of, but it was better. It was real. Later that night, she looked at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." Because sometimes, grace doesn't arrive in the form of miracles. Sometimes, it comes as a second chance wrapped in quiet joy. 2 years later, the sound of laughter echoed through Adaora's home, a home now filled with framed drawings, worn storybooks, and little footprints on tiled floors. Chisom, now 7, was doing a school project on family heroes. He held up a drawing for his mother. "This is you," he said proudly, "because you never gave up. And this is Daddy Jide because he helps people and loves you a lot." Adaora knelt and hugged him tightly. "And you, my brave boy, you made me a mother." Not long after, Adaora began to feel unusually tired. She chalked it up to stress. But Jide insisted she get a checkup. She hesitated. It felt impossible. After all these years, after the pain and healing, she had finally made peace with never carrying a child of her own. But the doctor's words were clear. "Mrs. Okoye, you're pregnant." Adaora sat in stunned silence. "Pregnant." She whispered it out loud, as if to confirm it was real. There were tears, but this time no sorrow. Only awe. Jide lifted her into his arms and wept. "God's timing is perfect," he whispered. When they told Chisom, he squealed with joy. "I prayed for a baby brother." Months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Chinazekpir, God answers prayers. Kelechi heard the news from a distance. Alone in a quiet apartment, he scrolled through the photos people shared of Adaora, glowing, loved, fulfilled. There was no bitterness left in him. Just silence, and perhaps a flicker of redemption. Adaora never sought revenge. Her joy was her answer. She built a life not out of spite, but from strength, kindness, and grace. And in the end, she proved a powerful truth. A woman's worth is never defined by what her body can or cannot do, but by the love, courage, and light she carries through even the darkest chapters. Her cradle had once been empty. Now, her heart overflowed. Here are the key lessons from the story. A woman's worth is not tied to childbearing. Adaora's journey teaches us that a woman's value does not depend on her ability to bear children. She is whole, valuable, and worthy regardless of her fertility status.